This morning we have a really super special interview and I'm super excited. I love the story of Bubsie and the boys. And David, welcome inside the studio today. You're here in person. We love that. It's always extra special when we have the person we're interviewing in the studio. Now, you've done an interview with us before for your book, Bubsie and the Boys. I love this story. I've done literature evangelism. My girls actually door knock and they've sold the children's version of the book door to door and they love it. They've got the little canvas down pack. So we're going to interview you today and we're going to step into a little bit more about the book and then some more stories and understand what God's been doing in your life and how you come to know God. But we just want to start out with a little bit of a recap from just for anyone who's listening who didn't hear the first interview, a bit of a recap of who you are, how you came to write the book, and there's also a special dedication in the book. So David, would you like to take it away and tell us the story in a recap?
Yeah, thank you, Rochelle. Good morning. Nice to see you. And nice to be chatting with your listeners on this lovely Thursday morning. Yes, so I was in here a couple of weeks ago chatting with Lawson and Scaffy about this book, Bubsie and the Boys. Bubsie is the nickname given to the first car that circled Australia 100 years ago. And it's a fabulous story of adventure, of faith, of overcoming significant difficulties. And some of your listeners may have done a similar trip, circled Australia. And as our family did 4 years ago, my wife and 3 kids, we spent 2 years circling this fabulous continent of ours and had a wonderful time together. We visited many, many people, dropped in on churches, spoke in really obscure places, like, did church services in tin sheds up on the Gulf of Carpentaria. We dropped in on church members who didn't have a fellow Christian within a couple hundred kilometres of them. We spent some time on islands where we dropped in on people who hadn't had a visitor for a couple of years. And so it was a fabulous time, and many of your listeners, either early in their life or even currently, or maybe one day want to circle Australia and explore this country. The story of Bubsie and the Boys is the story of the genesis of that adventure, the first ever car to circle Australia. And as you said, I love the story, and I'm hoping that your listeners, if they haven't done so already, might buy the book for themselves, might buy it as a Christmas present, or might download maybe even the audio version and listen to that as they travel around in their car. So, yeah, thank you for the chance to promote the book.
That's kind of a cool idea. I love that. You can retrace those steps. You could do the journey and you could listen to the book on audiobook as you go around.
Yes.
I think that's a great idea.
Yes.
And in this book, you have a really special dedication. Would you like to share with us how that came about?
Yes. So the book is dedicated to our eldest daughter, Jessica. Jessica would have been in year 12 this year. She began the school year. Her actual plans, when she finished year 12 at the end of this year, her plans were to travel with some of her friends around Australia. She enjoyed that experience with us as a family so much that she intended to take a year or two off academic studies and go travelling herself with friends, which we were excited about. I think adventure and travel is a wonderful way to get a sense of God's presence in your life and see his wonderful creation.
Yeah.
But at the beginning of the school year, the first week, Jess started getting headaches. In her first week of her school term, we had her in hospital a couple of times, and within a few weeks, she had been diagnosed with an aggressive brain cancer. And her illness only lasted 3 months.
Wow.
And Jess passed away in the middle of May this year. And we miss her deeply. We miss her every day. My wife and I, and our 2 remaining children, Jess's 2 younger siblings. We miss her every day. We talk about her every day, but we have this wonderful hope that we, through the promises of Jesus Christ, we will see her again. And that hope gives us great courage to continue and to wake up each day with a sense of expectation of spending time with Jess on an adventure, a heavenly adventure.
Yeah.
And some of your listeners will know the loss that death brings. But the promises of Jesus Christ says that death has no sting, death has no worry, and so as a result, we feel blessed on a number of things. One, we feel blessed that we had Jess for 17 and a half years. We know of parents that have lost their kids at a younger age, so we feel blessed that we had 17 and a half years with Jess. We feel blessed that we had a chance to say goodbye to her. There are some parents who have lost kids who didn't get a chance to say goodbye. In those last couple of days with Jessica, as we talked and prayed and shared the promise of Scripture, Jess, on the day before she went into a deep coma, Jess said to us, "Mum and Dad, it is well with my soul." And
beautiful.
that's a bit of a weird thing for a 17-and-a-half-year-old to say, isn't it? It is well with my soul. It's a quote from a 150-year-old hymn that believers have been singing for over a century.
Yeah.
But the background of that song, of course, is of a mum and dad who lost their children in a boating accident. And the writer of that song, Horatio Spafford, when he sailed over that same spot that he lost his daughters, when the captain of that ship said, "This is where your kid's ship went down," he sat down and wrote the words to that song, "Is Well With My Soul." And for Jess to share that with us, only a matter of a few hours before she went into a coma, was very, very special. And as a result, we know that it's well not only with Jess's soul but with our soul. And so the book, Bubsie and the Boys, is dedicated to Jess, to the adventures that she had in this lifetime and the adventures we're promised in the life to come.
Yeah, wow. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that hits all our hearts. I have to tell you that my daughter is about 17 and a half years old right now. So as you're telling that story, I can feel every ounce of it. Thank you for sharing Jess's story. So was the book and the dedication written after, obviously you'd been working on this book for about 4 years.
Yep.
So was it completed after Jess passed away?
Yes, it was. So we started writing this on our adventure a couple of years ago. Okay. We came across this wonderful story, and I was surprised that a comprehensive book had never been written. We did a bunch of research. In fact, my kids were a bit annoyed with me that rather than taking them to some secluded beach in the Kimberley of Western Australia, or doing some fabulous walk along a gorge, that instead I might have been in the caravan, doing some research or making some phone calls. So we completed the book. I completed writing the book a couple of years ago.
Okay.
And had always intended to have it published this year for the centenary of this event. The original car is in the National Museum of Australia in Canberra, and so for the centenary we thought we'd have the book coming out. And I'd always intended with a few mates to drive a car, the same model car, on the original track, the original route from 100 years ago. But when Jess got sick earlier this year, we put all of those plans on hold. The publishing of the book, the drive is going ahead next year. And so you asked about the dedication to Jess. The dedication to Jess happened where we acknowledge I've dedicated it to Jess, but also dedicated to every single person with a sense of adventure in life. And so the book ended up coming out after Jess died. And the drive that we have planned is also about raising money for a couple of fabulous charities. Canteen, which supports teenagers and young adults who are going through their own battle with cancer, and also a charity called Brainchild, which is a wonderful charity based in Queensland that helps kids and teenagers who are battling brain cancer, as Jess was.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow. So let me read the dedication that you've written. You say, to my wife, Joanne, and 3 children, Jessica, is it Kia?
Kia, yes.
And Ted. You've been wonderful companions on our travels together. To my eldest daughter, Jessica, 2007 to 2025. Brain cancer brought an early end to this life for you, but there will be no end to your adventures in the next one. And to every person who already has, currently is, or will one day travel this magnificent southern continent, may there be more beauty and less terror. On that thought, I want to segue. I want to ask you, as you were traveling around doing this trip, what are a couple of life lessons that really stand out for you from that trip?
Yeah, I think the first one that comes to mind, Rochelle, is that often people in life want to know what God's call for them is. What is God's purpose for their life? What's His plan? What would God like them to do with the gifts that and resources that God has given them? And it's my experience that God is very willing and wanting to share those plans He has for each of our lives. But more often than not, we need to kind of get going on something, to get moving, to get going in a certain direction, and that He can better steer us when we're heading off in a direction. So the lesson that I guess I've learned through not just our travels a couple of years ago, but also our experience with life, with ministry in general, is that if you just get out and go in a certain direction, God steers you. He finds it a bit more difficult to steer a parked car. I'm speaking metaphorically here. But if you go in a certain direction, sensing, maybe this is where if that's not the exact direction, He will better steer you as you go. So what I'm saying, I think, in answer to your question, what lessons have I learned about our relationship with God, is that that if you just get started, that's the difficult bit. That was the difficult bit with our travels 4 years ago.
It's hard getting out the door sometimes.
It's hard
with
getting
kids.
out the door. That's right. We had to, organise a caravan and a tow vehicle and rent out our house and organise some time off work and organise the school, the kids' schooling, all of those things.
Yeah.
Those sorts of things will be different for each person, depending on what the adventure might be. The hardest thing is actually getting started.
It's funny you say that. I've heard it said before with inventions, amazing ideas. People will have some amazing things, but to actually implement it is the difference between people that often have a creation that they've done and people that don't, because it's actually hard to implement.
Yes.
So yeah, you guys, okay. So the biggest lesson for you was to actually get started, and then God just, I guess, guided and meandered that path as you went around.
That's right. Made it obvious where He'd like us to be.
And were people used to people coming around this circuit? Is it something that at the different destinations, it was like it was common for visitors to be doing this trek? Yeah,
well, look, a big lap around Australia. So it's become that common that there's actually a category within the travel industry. It's called, the people that circle Australia are called lappers, or people on a big lap. And there are thousands of people every year that do it. There would have been hundreds of thousands of people, maybe even more, who've done it in their lifetime. And there are lots more. I mean, even many of your listeners this morning, Rochelle, would love one day to, in a van or their car or four-wheel drive or a truck or a carrot, they would love to one day just spend time in this magnificent country, to lap Australia, with all of its variations and differences. And so, yes, there's a whole community every day that is on the move, travelling around, and it's a wonderful adventure.
And did you find as you're going around you're in conjunction, like you kept seeing the same people?
Yeah, sure.
That's so cool.
That's right.
You get a community of people travelling.
And sometimes you travel together. particularly, we had young kids, a couple of teenage girls and a boy who was 8 or 9 years of age, and we'd connect with families in a similar category and travel with them for a couple of days, maybe even a week or two, and then they'd head off in a certain direction. Then a month later, we'd see them, up in the Kimberley or over in Queensland or something like that. So yes, and then there are other people that you kind of see on the road and you just give them a nod to. You've seen them a couple of times, and look, I've had, during our travels around Australia, we had some wonderful fireside conversations with people about faith.
Wow, that's amazing.
Because they're slowing down, they're contemplating the bigger things in life, they're willing to have conversations, willing to talk about the deeper things in life. And so, some fireside conversations in the middle of an outback terrain under a billion stars to talk about the possibility that a creator exists and that he has a plan for each of us. There were some wonderful conversations we had.
It sounds enticing. I think you're enticing many of us and many of our listeners that will consider, I'm sure, doing this big lap now. So I want to understand how you became this person who you are. How did you come to have faith? How did you come to be this person who did this with your family, wrote this book? Where did you begin? And even if we need more time, totally okay, we will segue with the news and continue. So if you can start the process of letting us know, how did you come to be who you are today?
Well, by God's good grace, Rochelle, we look. I felt that I've always been a believer in some kind of higher power. I come from an Irish Catholic background, so my sisters went to Catholic school. I somehow missed out on that experience of going to a church school, to a Catholic school. But I'd have the parish priest come around and visit me quite often. I think he kind of sensed in me some something, and so he'd often come around whenever I was watching the football, the rugby league, and he'd sit down and watch half a game with me, and then chat with me afterwards, and answer questions if I had them. And so I actually contemplated becoming a Catholic priest for during my teenage years, and it wasn't until I met up at my place of work through later in life, in my early 20s, with a gentleman who when I asked about a Friday night work function, Bernard said to me, "Oh, look, I don't know what's going on Friday night for work because they know I won't go." And I said, "Oh, why is that? It's a bit strange. Why is that?" And he said, "I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, and so I honour the biblical Sabbath sort of from Friday sunset through to Saturday sunset." I said, "Fair enough," and found out about the work function from somewhere else, and then for the next few days thought, that's a bit weird, isn't it? I thought he was a fairly normal fellow. What's he doing being caught up in a cult? My naivety, I thought the Seventh-day Adventist faith was a cult. And so the next time I saw Bernard, I said to him, "Look, I'm really intrigued about this Friday night sunset thing and honouring the Sabbath, this biblical Sabbath. Then, would you mind if I came to church with you sometime? I hope I'm not embarrassing you or it's offensive at all, but would you mind if I came to one of your church programs?" And so that was the beginning. That was 35 odd years ago. I'm in my mid 50s now. And so 35 years ago, I wandered into a Seventh-day Adventist church, and on that first Saturday morning, that first Sabbath morning, when I walked in, I had this overwhelming feeling as I walked into that church in Western Sydney that I was going to become a Seventh-day Adventist.
Oh, wow.
And just needed time to find out why. And that was a wonderful impression. I think it was God speaking to me. And so over the last 35 odd years, my life has been irrevocably changed. I'm now a minister of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I wonder what my Catholic priest might say about that if we got to watch a football game again. And so I felt incredibly blessed by the way the Lord has led my life.
Well, I hear that there's an interesting story as a part of that. And it might include something that our listeners, if you remember what VHS tapes are, I feel like I must be getting older because I know what they are. I've heard that there might be a little bit story around an interesting night. Can you share with us what happened that night?
I can. Do we have enough time? Because this story goes for about 2 minutes.
Yeah, take that time and we'll head into the news. But do you want to, we can talk about something else and then do that after the news?
Well, let me have a go now. Let me have a go now at just sharing this. So, look, this is it's a bit of a weird story from a few years ago. I'm intrigued, Rochelle, how you've heard about this story. So, look, when I was attending this church in Western Sydney, there 35 years ago, there was a gentleman there who was keen for me to watch some programs on biblical prophecy. It was an old series, I think, filmed in the 80s or 90s and on VHS tape. It was some of your older listeners may remember this series. It was Kenneth Cox's. He was the presenter, and it was called Dimensions of Prophecy, about the way that predictions in the Bible had come true in the life of Jesus Christ. And this gentleman there in this church in Western Sydney was keen for me to see some of these videos. And he said, come over my place, Dave, and watch them. And so I'd always kind of fob him off politely, yeah, sure, one day maybe, Peter. And then one Saturday night, I was driving through the suburb that he was in and glanced down at my centre console in the car and saw his card with his number that he'd given me. And so I called him up from the car and said, Peter, I'm just in your area. Do you mind if you've invited me over to watch some videos, but I'm only 2 minutes away. Why don't I drop over now? Just impromptu, spontaneous. And he said, yeah, sure. Come on over, David. And so when I got there a couple of minutes later, he and his wife greeted me at the door. She had just put the kids to bed. It's about 8:30 on a Saturday night. They welcomed me into their home, and then Peter went to his linen cupboard and got his VHS tape. Now, some of your younger listeners won't know, but that was how we used to watch recordings back then. It was on a tape system, and there was a machine you plugged into your telly, and he got his VHS player out of the cupboard.
So we're hearing this story where God has been meandering your path to come and get to know him, and we're trying to find out where these VHS tapes come into play. So you've arrived at this gentleman's house who's invited you over a few times to watch it, and take us away now to what happened.
Yeah, so walked into this house there in Lane Cove in the lower north shore of Sydney 35 years ago, and had Peter and Liz welcome me in, and they went to their linen cupboard and got the VHS player out of the linen cupboard and plugged it into their TV, and then inserted these tapes, one tape, and we began watching. I'd been studying the Bible for a couple of months and was coming to an understanding that not only was God a reality, but he had a purpose for my life. And so we watched this tape together, Peter and his wife and I. And then Peter's wife went to bed. She'd had a long Saturday with the kids. And Peter and I sat and watched a second tape. And at the end of the second tape, we stopped and, chatted about the content. And it was around about 11 o'clock at night by this stage. And Peter said, look, Dave, I'm a bit tired. I'm going to head off to bed. And almost as an afterthought, he said, but look, you're welcome to stay here and watch some more tapes if you'd like. I think he was just being polite, but I didn't pick up on those social
You're young enough
cues.
to miss it.
So it's only 11 o'clock on a Saturday night. What's someone in their early 20s know about going to bed before midnight on a Saturday? And so I said, sure, Pete, thanks for that. Yeah, let a strange bloke, stay in your house while you and your family all sleep.
Yeah, they've all gone to bed.
And they've all
That's
gone to bed.
classic.
So Peter went off to bed, and I continued watching some of these tapes. And I watched about 3 or 4, and about 3 o'clock that morning, after watching 4 or 5 of these tapes, these shows on programs on biblical prophecy, I just became overwhelmingly convinced that God was present. And so I did this, like a clumsy sinner's prayer where you acknowledge the fact that you're a sinner, that you need, the Lord's presence in your life for salvation. And so I prayed this very clumsy prayer and then promptly put another tape into the VHS player.
Wow.
But I didn't last. I must have fallen asleep on his in his lounge room within about 10 minutes. And the next thing I know, the kids are waking me up at 6 o'clock, 6:30 in the morning. They come in. They were a bit, they kind of were shocked when a strange bloke was asleep on their lounge room floor. They called out to their mum and dad. Peter and Liz came in and said, "Oh, glad that you're still here. Would you like some breakfast?" And I was embarrassed by this stage, and I just, "Oh, look, no, I've got to get going."
You'd fallen asleep without really, probably just in sheer tiredness. You weren't expecting to stay the night.
I wasn't. I was a bit embarrassed. And so a couple of days later, I get a phone call from Peter, and he said, "Look, lovely to have you over the other night, and great that you could watch those tapes with us. I hope that they were, you enjoyed them, and love to have you back sometime." And then he said, "But Dave, I've just got to ask a question. My wife and I have been curious for the last couple of days, because we just want to know, when we went to bed, did anything happen?" And I said, "Well, it's funny you should ask, Peter, because look, I think I've become a follower of Christ. I prayed this prayer, and asked God into my life." And he said, "I knew it. I knew something must have happened." And I said, "Why do you ask? That's a strange question to ask, that." He said, "Why do you ask?" He said, "Because when you called up from your car on Saturday night and said you were coming over, and I, when I hung up, I said to Liz that young fella from church is coming along to watch some videos. She reminded me that our VHS player hadn't worked for months."
Oh,
and
wow.
so we prayed before you arrived, before you knocked on the door, that our VHS player would work. And so when we pulled it out of our cupboard that had been stored in and it worked, we were surprised. And when you left that Sunday morning and we thought we'd let the kids watch something on their VHS tapes, it wasn't working.
David,
and it hasn't worked since you've left. And so it only worked when you got here and it stopped working when you... So I kind of took that as some little supernatural miracle.
It is a miracle. Wow.
And so I've sometimes joked when I share that story, Rochelle, that if you have some broken down household appliances, like a toaster or a kettle, take it along to some kind of church outreach program, and you never know what the Lord might do.
Oh, David, I'm so glad we told that story. I know the listeners will be absolutely blessed, and I hope they're all smiling too. Wow, that is amazing. David, you have such a way about you, and you have such a joy in your smile. And I want to hear more, because I know that from Jess passing away, you've had some major diagnosis yourself. So, I can see God has moved in your life, and what an amazing miracle story to be able to have to share with people. Can you talk us through what you're going through now, and how God is there, and how he's showing himself in your life now, and how you're processing what's going on now in your life?
So, Rochelle, yes, some of your listeners may not have been tuning in before the news, and so I shared then, of course, that our 17-year-old daughter died from brain cancer 6 months ago after a short battle, and the doctors were a bit surprised that Jess had this particular brain cancer so early in life. So they ran some tests while Jess was still alive and discovered that Jess had a very rare syndrome that made her 150 times the average person's chance of contracting cancer. And they then told us, when they discovered this rare syndrome that Jess has, that it was genetic. And so my wife and I did some tests, and it was discovered that I had that rare syndrome. And thankfully I hadn't passed it on to our other kids. And it looks like, from testing across all our family, that it's happened in me spontaneously, which is a real answer to prayer as well. So nobody else in my family has been affected. But they then sent me for some tests as well, some cancer screening tests, and and shortly after Jess died, and it was discovered that I have pancreatic cancer, and that it's already metastasized to multiple parts of my body: lungs, bones, and lymphatic system. And the doctors are telling me that that they think that I probably have about 6-7 more months to live. I'm currently on chemotherapy, but the chemotherapy is not curative. It's just about extending my life a little bit, which I think is important for my kids, having lost their sister so recently. But I'm at peace with this diagnosis. Statistically, I probably should have been dead many years ago, but the Lord in his wisdom has allowed me to live as long as I have. I don't know why yet. Maybe I've got some ideas of maybe why I've been allowed to live this long. But one of those, I think, is that that the Lord has blessed me by allowing me to live long enough to see my daughter Jessica through to her end of life. And while walking my daughter to the grave is probably the hardest thing my wife and I have ever done in our lives. I wouldn't say probably, it is the hardest thing we've ever done in our lives.
Of course.
I also consider it an honour to have been able to do that. And if that's the reason why the Lord has allowed me to live so long, I'm 57 next month, and I feel blessed that he's given me that privilege of seeing Jess through to her sleep. And I'm at peace with my diagnosis. My faith is stronger than ever. I know from our experience with Jess and my own walk through this particular valley that death has nothing to fear. I'm not afraid at all. I know that our Saviour, Jesus Christ, is able to make good on the promises that he has made. And the last great promise that he left his believers and leaves with us today is that this life is not all that there is a life to come, and there are so many more adventures to happen in the life to come. And I'm excited about what the future holds. A future with no more death, no more crying, no more mourning, no more sickness, no more pain, no more sorrow.
One of my favourite verses when I was really sick and I had just come to know who God was there's a verse that talks about that our joy will never be taken away from us again. And it just hit me. I'm just like, imagine somewhere where it will never go. Your joy will remain for forever. And I'm like, wow.
Yes.
That's what we were meant to have.
Yes, there's that wonderful psalm, isn't there? Weeping shall last for an evening, but joy comes in the morning.
I want to ask one more question as our time's dwindling down. It's probably the most question people ask when I'm door knocking, and it's a Job question. And that is, people struggle to understand how God can be loving when there's suffering. And yet you're living testimony right now of still believing in a loving God when you've seen, I think, probably the hardest of suffering, at least as a parent. And I just want to know, can you answer that question for our listeners, because you're living it firsthand?
Why is there so much suffering in the world?
And how can God be a loving God when you're facing these type of things? How can they know that he's a loving God?
Well, even throughout life's difficulties, there are blessings, there are joys, there is things to be thankful for. We experienced that with Jess's illness earlier this year. That even though her sickness was incredibly difficult, we saw blessings through that. We saw answers to prayer through that. The hope that we have in Christ doesn't mean that there'll be no difficulties in this lifetime. Jesus never promised that. There is an opposing force to Jesus in this world, and that opposing force will continue to ramp up whatever pain and difficulties to draw you away from a loving God. But if we just keep our eyes focused on the fact that God has given us so much hope, all of those things that the devil throws at us will soon just melt away. And so, from our experience, if we can just focus on the love of God, and each of your listeners can focus on the joy that we have in this life and the joy to come, the difficulties of this world, by comparison, will be incredibly minor.
Yeah. Thank you, David. Thank you so much for being with us today. I hope you've been as blessed as I have been. We've been able to laugh, and I know you would have felt the impact of what they're going through, and I'm sure we can all come together and pray for you, David.
Thank you.
I think if it's okay, we'll have a prayer with you now.
I'll be blessed. Thank you.
All right. Dear Heavenly Father, I just want to come to you today here with David. Lord, we know that I just thank you for the blessings and the lessons that he's learning and that he's been able to share with us, Lord. I just want to pray that you'll just continue to give him the peace and the love and the joy that you've been giving him as he treads the path of this life that you've got before him, Lord. And I pray that you'll be able to open up the right doors and that he'll be able to reach many more people. Lord, I pray that our listeners will be blessed and will be inspired to know that no matter what the walk is that each of our listeners are going through, that you can look to Jesus and look to eternity and know that there's a future of love and joy without pain and suffering to come. So, Lord, I just thank you for the interview today. And, in your wonderful name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
So thank you, David, so much. Bubsie and the Boys is now available. It's
in all good bookstores, online, Audible. You can download it, and even on Amazon Kindle as well. I hope you enjoy the story.